What's up? I'm Jared Harris, and you're listening to episode 56 of Beats by Jer, brought to you by Dropout Entertainment. In 1973, the man who fell to Earth took the name of Ziggy Stardust and brought a message of Earth's impending doom. In his pursuits of spreading hope through music, as a bisexual alien savior, he succumbed to the excess of his own fame and drugs, losing himself and his purpose in the midst of his celebrity identity. The spaceman would die on stage, consumed by his idolizing fans. This is a narrative behind Bowie's iconic album, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, an album that, ironically, launched Bowie into the stratosphere while greatly steering the tone of 70s glam rock. More than just a space-age fantasy, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust serves as an ever-relevant cautionary tale, but more than that, Bowie had crafted a blueprint that he would follow throughout his career as he transitioned from era to era, sound to sound, album to album, jumping from the glam rock of the early 70s to the soul of young Americans, the brilliant fusion of station to station, an album he had no recollection of making, likely due to the fact that his diet at the time consisted solely of green peppers, milk, and copious amounts of cocaine. Or the subsequent avant-garde of the Berlin Trilogy, a series of albums made while on a self-imposed exile to Berlin as a means of remaining creatively active while kicking his substance dependency along with Iggy Pop. Beyond this, there was, of course, the pop of Let's Dance, and perhaps more drastically, the electronic influence of the 90s and early 2000s. Bowie needs no introduction. His body of work remains timeless. The musical curiosity at the core of Bowie as an artist, songwriter, and performer truly made him a chameleon. And while we champion him as an innovative rock star, his catalog resembles purely that of a groundbreaking artist who, seemingly at every peak, refused to stay put, moving on to the next challenge. There's a level of integrity to this notion that few artists of this scale have. There is no return of Ziggy Stardust. He dies on the album's final tracks, following the realization of his own disillusionment. Much like Ziggy, Bowie embodied this too, through changing his sound and image on many occasions, demonstrating a greater purpose of music for music's sake. With every reinvention, it was a reminder that what's done has already been done and there was still work to do, even at the risk of never reaching the same heights of yesteryears. If anything, Ziggy Stardust served as both the blueprint and a warning that Bowie carried with him as he moved from era to era. January 10th, 2026 marks the 10-year anniversary of the passing of David Bowie. And if you're Gary Oldman, then it's the 10-year anniversary to when everything went to shit, citing his old friend as the cosmic glue that held our timeline or universe together. The death of Bowie, quite cinematically, followed the release of his final studio album, Blackstar, which was released just 2 days earlier. The album is a musical breakthrough that plays off of vintage electronic styles performed through instruments and reinterpreted through jazz fusion, making for a record that is unlike anything else Bowie has dared to do. One final excursion beyond the pioneering rock identity of his legacy. Blackstar also served as a fitting conclusion to Bowie's life and career as the spaceman faced the great unknown, coming to grips with the impending end, grappling with his own mortality as he transcended to the great beyond. To be clear, Blackstar musically is an exceptional album, but when paired so closely in time and lyrically to his own passing, Bowie brought his life to a close in miraculously artistic fashion. To this, Blackstar is a marvel, not only for its music, but its context. To better understand the weight of Blackstar, of course, we need to take a few steps back. With that, let's look at 2004, during the A Reality tour. The tour in support of 2003's album Reality was the longest of Bowie's career, stretching from October 2003 to June 2004, performing roughly 110 shows across Europe, North America, Asia, and Oceania. The tour came to a close following his set at Germany's Hurricane Festival. Bowie, after completing his set and encore, would collapse backstage, suffering a heart attack. This marked the end of Bowie's live career and, for roughly a decade, his career as a recording artist. Had he never returned, this perhaps would have been the truest interpretation of the Ziggy Stardust myth, someone who gave it all on stage and was consumed in front of his fans by his own identity. However, we know there was more to come. In that decade, though, the silence was deafening, and the return of Bowie, while highly anticipated, went unanswered, becoming a rumor and eventually something only of dreams. That is until 2013, when Bowie released The Next Day, his first studio album in a decade, the longest gap between records in his entire career. The album was preceded by 2 singles, the reflective, melancholic pondering of A Tender Ballad, Where Are We Now, and the driving The Stars Are Out Tonight. The album felt both refreshing and familiar, as best signified by the album cover, a repurposed shot of 1977's Heroes. Rather than break new ground, The Next Day was an art rock record that reinterpreted previous eras of his career through a new lens, pulling from Ziggy Stardust, Low, and Scary Monsters, offering a distinct but again familiar take. Despite retracing what had previously been done, The Next Day was a fantastic album. From the eerie dissonance under the major key of the title track, the disjointed Dirty Boys, the dizzying I'd Rather Be High, the sauntering swagger of Boss of Me, the record just felt full of optimism, almost as though Bowie was staging a major comeback. And then, nothing. No tour, no subsequent music following the string of singles that would be released throughout the rest of the year. There was no comeback. Instead, the conversation shifted to the realization that The Next Day was likely the final album to come from Bowie, an isolated occurrence, a brief, momentary return to a life that he had previously retired from. While this continued to spur some conversations, wondering when the next album would emerge or if Bowie would ever return to the stage, again, the silence was deafening. And just like in 2004, the assumption grew that there would be no more. However, we would not have to wait another decade between records. In fact, in 2014, the compilation album Nothing Has Changed was released. In addition to being a greatest hits, the record featured Sue, or In a Season of Crime, a new original written by Bowie and Maria Schneider. Furthermore, the single came with a B-side, 'Tis a Pity She Was a Whore, which was not included on the actual compilation, but was released with the single. The former of the two sees Bowie front a jazz orchestra in a sort of noir big band tone, very suspenseful and entirely different from the retrospective approach of The Next Day, whereas the latter was a raw, almost unmixed demo that is very inspired by the electric analog fusion collision of Death Grips, a rather niche band that was probably as big as an underground outfit could be in the 2010s, and a band that Bowie was a big fan of, which is crazy, and I think really speaks to the idea that Bowie spent his life scouring for new music and inspiration, and was always kept his ear to the ground for what was independent, unsigned, on the fringes. He was always looking in the corners that you would not expect a 70s classic rock legend to be looking at. I think, again, just a great statement of who he was as an artist. 'Tis a Pity She Was a Whore is super rough, and rumor has it is that Bowie actually performed everything on the demo himself. This is where the genesis of Blackstar begins. In the wake of The Next Day, Bowie pursued an entirely different artistic direction, almost as though if he designed the two albums, The Next Day and Blackstar, as a pairing to give listeners a taste of what was and what could have been. While both Sue or In a Season of Crime and 'Tis a Pity She Was a Whore would be re-recorded to fit the sound of Blackstar, these early versions demonstrate an artistic yearning for one final excursion into the unknown. But again, their attachment to Nothing Has Changed left eager listeners with the feeling that this was nothing more than something added to bolster a compilation album. A year later, on November 19th, 2015, with no warning, Bowie dropped his brand new single, Blackstar, the title track and first offering of the album of the same name. It was accompanied by a music video. It was the first to come from the album and was truly a breakthrough. This was Bowie unlike ever before. Of course, there were elements from his past. I don't think I could say it better than Ryan Domball from Pitchfork, who in his review said it is closer to the cocaine-fueled fantasias of 1976's Station to Station than almost anything Bowie has done since. I also drew this parallel immediately, and this is one of the things that drew me into Blackstar as much as it did. There was a touch of fusion. It wasn't quite jazz, but it was jazz. It wasn't electronic, but it was electronic. And it wasn't avant-garde, but it sure as hell wasn't rock. And when you look back at Bowie's work, Station to Station is probably the best sort of touch point to Blackstar, the precursor decades and decades ago. There was an echo of Station to Station, yet it felt entirely new, almost genreless. The release of Blackstar is one of those rare and fleeting moments where I was left entirely awestruck. One of my favorite artists at the age of 68 had reinvented the wheel and done so in truly unique fashion. I was beyond riveted and thoroughly inspired. The album, even a decade on, still gives me chills. I can vividly remember the first time I heard the single Blackstar. I was in the first semester of my fourth year at jazz school. I was sitting in the Fine Arts Lounge at Accolade East in York University when I saw that the song and video had dropped, clocking in at an expansive 9 minutes and 56 seconds. I sat and listened to the song in its entirety, immediately arrested by what I was hearing. Then I saw that there was a video. Another 9 minutes and 56 seconds later, and I was spinning. I can't remember what class I was waiting to go to, but I can tell you that I didn't go. I was enthralled by this song and the accompanying video. I sat and listened and watched on repeat while trying to find absolutely everything I could about this track. Was there more to come? Who is playing drums? What is the message? What is Blackstar? Sadly, the older you get, the less you are so fundamentally struck to your very foundation by the spirit of curiosity and obsession. While there have been moments since, hearing Blackstar on November 19th, 2015 was foundational. Musically, ambient guitars and a quiet flute open the song before the pulse of drum and bass-inspired drums enter with soaring atmospheric vocals from Bowie. It remains so incredibly striking. The light horns paired with drum and bass see the fusion between jazz and electronic music. There's a contemporary vocal tone added to it. As the song develops, following a winding sax solo, there is an element reminiscent to a rock opera without actually sounding like one. Think the ethos and grandeur of a rock opera without guitars or the sense of overindulgent. You know he's building to something. You know there's something bigger, but it's actually quite simple. But nonetheless, you know that there's a greater message, theme, idea. It's a composition. There are chanting backing vocals inspired by Gregorian chants, and Bowie's subtle use of harmonies feels eerie, similar to that of what you would expect to hear from maybe Alice in Chains. There's a pulse reminiscent of house music and just a touch, side by side, just a touch of rock sensibilities. Jazz fusion seems like it doesn't quite cover everything, but it's probably the best word to describe the sound of Blackstar. Following a B section, the song returns to the A section melodically. However, it's over the rhythmic march established in the B section. Gone is the drum and bass that we first heard, and the song comes to a final close as each element slowly just falls apart with a slight 12-tone chromatic close. Musically, there is so much going on here. But at the same time, it's relatively straightforward and it's relatively simple. There's something about the instrumentation, the lean sound, the minimal overdubs, the production. There's something about it that's very simple despite all of its complexities. It never feels strained. It never feels like it's trying. It never feels like it's challenging. But when you sit down and you analyze these elements, you realize there's so much more going on that makes Blackstar so experimental, so exceptional. Musically, there is so much going on, but there's perhaps even more in the music video, which starts with us stumbling upon the corpse of an astronaut in some sort of cosmic setting illuminated by a near total eclipse. Presumably, this is Major Tom, the protagonist present and introduced on Bowie's breakthrough single, Space Oddity. It's a strong visual to open on, the shedding of skin of past eras as you usher in the new with a dynamic debut single from your new project. A woman with a tail finds the body and takes the jewel-encrusted skull of the astronaut. As she returns to her village among the dunes, shots of 3 people, possibly possessed, possibly strung out, dance in a trance-like, entirely uniform style. It's a little unsettling. It's very curious. It's bizarre. It's artistic. It's so strange. More shots interject the narrative. Shots of Bowie blindfolded with buttons sewn over his eyes. Later, he's seen without the bandage blindfold, holding a leather book marked with the star formation that would become the Blackstar album art, beside the same 3 dancers who are now standing as he waves the book in the air, very cult-like. This same Bowie sans blindfold can be seen dancing in a different setting and singing in the attic in which the 3 were dancing in. He moves in a similar way to them, but feels more free, more liberated almost. The choreography is something else. It's so strange, but it feels incredibly purposeful. Later, 3 figures, possibly the same 3 dancers, can be seen strung up on crosses in a field, their clothes stuffed with hay. Are they scarecrows? Are they crucified? Are they both? Who put them there? Their bodies wither against their wooden frames. They try to move, but they're restricted, obviously. Bowie continues brandishing the book, again like a cult figure, just looking onward. As the music returns to the modified A section, Bowie is once again blindfolded, while the woman with the tail presents the skull to a circle of more young women in the sand as they dance in uniform, but strikingly differently than the previous dancers. They do not dance in a way that resembles the others, right? The previous dancers looked as though they were tweaking out. These women look free. There's a slight kaleidoscope effect as we see colors emit from the skull. I give this detailed breakdown. I mean, watch the video. It's a fantastic video. It will leave you curious and questioning. But I say all this to highlight that there is a lot going on in the video, and it's entirely up to your own interpretation. Bowie never provided any context to the song's lyrics or the imagery surrounding it, but there is an overwhelming amount of symbolism to it. People on Reddit have likened the crucifixion of 3 anonymous figures to that of the worship of false idols, while we can draw parallels to themes of celebrity that Bowie has explored at length in many different periods of his work. Between this and the book, there is a message of subverting the messiah complex of immense fame. And in hindsight, there are hints towards his mortality. The end is in sight. But it was hard to see that in November 2015. For starters, one thing that we can draw is that the blindfold that he is primarily seen with wrapped around his eyes connects to a northwestern Philippine tradition where you blindfold the deceased. Director Johan Rennick has shed some light, but he too leans into the idea that his interpretation is only one way to look at it, recognizing that Bowie had his own vision throughout the highly collaborative project, and that much of what has been seen is up for you to decipher. In an interview with Vice, he stated, "If I did a music video without any involvement from the artist at all, I would speak freely on it. But here there has been a long process, a lot of things tossed up and down, turned around and twirled with. It's truly collaborative, and I wouldn't want to try and voice what the meanings would be without David in the room." Reflecting on working with Bowie, he also stated, "Here's the thing. David is an extraordinarily well-read man. He's truly brilliant. His depth of reference is a chasm. He knows everything, he's stumbled upon everything, and after doing what he's been doing for such a long time, he's still enormously curious, enormously creative in the right sense." Rewatching the video now, it's hard not to see it through the lens of a decade later. Is the discovery of the jewel-encrusted skull that of Major Tom's, reflecting on the notion that art will outlive the artists and future generations will continue to stumble upon the work of the past, leaving it forever open to further interpretation through generational discovery? As the young woman revel in the presence of the skull, was it Bowie knowing that his body of work, the music that he spent his life curating, is in fact not his, but belonging to the world? And predicting not necessarily a resurgence in popularity, it is a small circle that finds the skull after all, but the reverence that will be placed on future discovery. That perhaps art is eternal, whereas the artist is only bound to this very mortal vessel. A month later, Lazarus was released on December 17th, 2015. The song feels more straightforward as a melodic guitar line intertwines with the horns. The song is a dark, brooding ballad, accented by the thin tone of a Fender Telecaster run through some hot tubes. Seriously, the tone of that guitar is fantastic. As it cuts through the somber soundtrack like a hot knife. It is so... I mean, it's not distorted, but compared to the rest of the song, the rest of the album, it's such a distorted tone, such a strong accent. It's so powerful. So much so that in the album's credits, Bowie is credited with doing some of the guitar, but he is specifically credited with playing a Fender Telecaster on Lazarus. That tone is insane. This is soft rock, aside from that very distorted tone. This is soft rock meets jazz fusion, as the song slowly reaches a point of instrumental climax with the closing build-up. It's an absolute slow burner, but it's incendiary when it gets there. The music video for Lazarus would follow on January 7th, 2016, a day prior to the release of Blackstar, and 3 days before Bowie would pass. The video opens with a wardrobe partially open, inside of which looks like a hospital room. Our first shot of Bowie, we see him blindfolded in a bed, dressed in a gown. The shot almost reflects that of a coffin. As the camera pans back, we can see that it is a hospital bed with the tile matching that as the same room with the wardrobe. Over the course of the song, Bowie sings from the bed while we see shots of a separate room underneath the bed, only here and there, hinting at something. I'm not too sure what. Once again, as the song reaches the bridge, which is the most upbeat part similar to that of Blackstar, a burst of optimism among the ballad. We see Bowie dancing in front of the wardrobe with the blindfold removed. Gone are the funeral robes of the previous shot. Now he stands in a striped tracksuit, looking rather otherworldly. It's actually the same tracksuit that he wore on the back cover of the Station to Station CD reissue from the 90s. As we return to the verse, the shots of two Bowies begin to cut back to one and the other. Only now, the cosmic dancing Bowie begins to grow nervous, distressed, and eventually frightened. Whereas the bedbound Bowie gets increasingly animated, dare I say even lively. The cosmic Bowie pensively writes a letter, and the edges of the book seen in the Blackstar video can ever so slightly be made out as the first Bowie finally sits up, arms aloft to the sky, as the other Bowie slowly returns to the wardrobe. Lyrically, Lazarus is Bowie confronting his diagnosis, that the end, after a private battle with liver cancer, was near. At the time, nobody knew this. Rather, it seemed that Bowie in his late 60s was waxing on the idea that he was getting older. Little did we know, however. The first line of the song prophetically reads, "Look up here, I'm in heaven." The final verse goes, "This way or no way, you know I'll be free, just like that bluebird. Now ain't that just like me?" The bluebird has long been a symbol of happiness, renewal, and the return of light after dark seasons. In times of grief, many people see a bluebird's sudden appearance as a comforting sign, a quiet message of a loved one's spirit is at peace, and that love continues beyond loss. And of course, the title refers to Lazarus of Bethany, the biblical figure who is resurrected as one of Christ's miracles as told in the book of John. Through this, Lazarus is the soul of Blackstar. It is Bowie's lyrical thesis statement. Musically and visually, we see Bowie confronted by his prognosis, paralyzed by fear. However, by the end, he is liberated as he reaches for his final days before returning to the wardrobe, which of course is a C.S. Lewis reference designed to represent the afterlife. He has made his peace. He has come to accept his impending passing. You could even look at the video and see him writing that letter and recognize that as a symbol of the creation of Blackstar itself, one final note. According to Bowie's producer, Tony Visconti, the lyrics and video of Lazarus and other songs on the album were intended to be a self-epitaph, a commentary on Bowie's own impending death. The song's reference to Lazarus has been interpreted as referring to Bowie's prediction of increased fame following his death, if you will, a return after the end. This idea builds upon my thoughts on the Blackstar video that the artist will forever live on through their work, a signature forever etched into this earth that will exist long after we are dust and bones. Metaphysically, Lazarus is Blackstar. A final goodbye, a rare reveal behind the curtain. While still fairly cryptic, Lazarus is, without a doubt, about the process of facing one's mortality, recognizing that we must all come to an end and that we are all finite. Nobody gets out alive. It is a moment of grieving for oneself and having the time to reach acceptance and thus peace. But again, nobody could have predicted that Bowie was actually going through this process himself. While countless artists have done this, dedicated their songs to their age, reflecting on the life they've lived, knowing that they are in the final act, few, if anyone, has created performance art of their own soon passing. If Lazarus is about the process of grief towards acceptance, that means Bowie first had to go through this in order to actually reflect on it. And to masterfully track this feeling to music as one final hurrah is astounding. The next day, January 8th, 2016, Blackstar was released. It was Bowie's 69th birthday. The album was incredible, an instant classic that demonstrated the artistry of Bowie alongside his prowess and vision as a songwriter, but captured him creating something unlike anything else that he had previously done. Something that we don't tend to see with aging artists. We don't tend to see it with classic rock legends. We don't tend to see artists of that generation branching out in such a way. It is so much easier to put out an album that is designed to resonate with the audience that first fell in love with your work. It is beyond easy to do that, right? It's so much easier. And instead, Bowie refused. To me, Blackstar can stand beside Bowie's most essential and classic work. It's an incredible record. I would go as far to say it's one of my absolute favorite albums ever made. It's such a stunning display of raw human emotion as Bowie chose to astound even in the face of his own demise. One final trick before the curtain closes. One last encore. I would argue it is not only one of Bowie's greatest records, but it is one of the best albums to emerge from the 2010s and potentially among the most influential for the course of artistry, ambition, and possibilities, as Bowie, at the age of 69 in 2016, decades after his biggest peaks, still demanded relevancy. Blackstar was recorded with Donnie McCaslin, a prolific jazz saxophonist. McCaslin was the band leader, and while songwriting is entirely attributed to Bowie, with the exception of Sue or In a Season of Crime, who shares a co-write with Maria Schneider, McCaslin was given a great level of freedom in the studio. I spoke to him in 2018 for The Spill magazine as we discussed his then newly released album, Blow. Naturally, we spoke about Bowie, and he briefly told me about the Blackstar sessions and how he would lead the band live in the same room through the structures, and he, along with drummer Mark Juliana, who is one of the best jazz drummers of our time, possibly one of the best drummers of our time, pianist Jason Linder and bassist Tom LeBreve, he would lead them through the structures of each song, building off of one another in real time. It was such a organic process, very, very jazz, very much allowing for levels of improvisation from everyone involved. Still, despite this, their performances feel exceptionally refined and largely unedited. They are improvising. There is a lot going on here, but they're doing so tastefully, minimally, subtly. It's so nuanced. It's so fantastic. And it seems largely unedited as well. According to our conversation, Bowie was almost always present, singing with the band from behind the glass, which again speaks to his dedication to this project, his conviction to being involved at all levels of the making of Blackstar. As you can tell from the singles alone, the collective honed a modern and sleek jazz sound that was fusion only in name, as they ebbed and flowed between elements of rock, pop, jazz, drum and bass, house, and the avant-garde subtly and seamlessly. Musically, this was entirely new territory for Bowie, and while he did dabble with electronic music before, His work has never been jazzy. Ironically, following the original release of Sue or In a Season of Crime, Bowie wanted to make a big band record. Somehow, he ended up with a much smaller ensemble as they locked in on a sound that at the time felt peerless and free of genre. Still, a decade later, Blackstar feels unprecedented. Recently, an interview with Tony Visconti has reemerged in the wake of the 10-year anniversary. And in this interview, Visconti stated that he and Bowie were actually listening to a lot of Kendrick Lamar, specifically Lamar's opus, To Pimp a Butterfly. Visconti gave Kendrick his flowers, stating, "He threw everything on there, and that's exactly what we wanted to do. The goal in many, many ways was to avoid rock and roll." Perhaps it was Kendrick that inspired the shift into a darker jazz fusion tone, avoiding the classic big band sound that Bowie had first gotten the idea with. Blackstar was produced by Bowie and longtime collaborator Tony Visconti. Visconti is perhaps the most consistent and frequent collaborator of Bowie's, having produced his sophomore self-titled album, a majority of his records from the 70s, Scary Monsters and Super Creep, and all of his work from 2002 onwards. Visconti's involvement leaves me very curious and further impressed. Some of Visconti's other production credits list albums from T-Rex, Badfinger, and Thin Lizzy. The dude is an absolute classic rock innovator through and through. His sound is synonymous with that early 1970s glam rock sound. Bowie was obviously very instrumental in the development of that, but we cannot discount Visconti as an architect of 70s glam rock. And yet, the commitment to avoid any of the sounds of Bowie's most known years and records, and a majority of Visconti's own experience, is so ambitious. The dedication to, as he said, to avoid anything that was rock, that's so challenging. And it's incredible that they were both able to stray from what either of them had ever done to such a degree. It's so impressive, not only to the standard of which that they delivered Blackstar, but the dedication to artistic vision, to that original plan is incredible. Blackstar was recorded from January to May of 2015 in New York City. Curiously, though, To Pimp a Butterfly was not released until March of that year, once again leaving me curious as to the shape of Blackstar prior to hearing Lamar's work. How much of To Pimp a Butterfly did Bowie and Visconti listen to? How much of an influence did it have? And how much of an influence did it actually play on Blackstar in those remaining 2.5 months? Did it steer the ship in an entirely different direction? How much did it alter the course? And what did Blackstar look like prior to that influence that was that influence that stood out to Visconti so much? While accounts vary slightly, it seems that only Visconti knew that Bowie was in the midst of treatment for his liver cancer. The band knew that he was unwell, but not to the extent or what it was. Bowie had been diagnosed in the summer of 2014 and was undergoing chemotherapy treatments by the time the sessions began in January 2015. Visconti recalled that despite his illness, Bowie was in high spirits throughout the sessions, stating, "He was so brave and courageous, and his energy was still incredible for a man who had cancer." Apparently by summer 2015, after the album had been completed, the cancer was in remission. However, by November, shortly after completing the Lazarus music video, Bowie had told Visconti that the cancer had returned and that his condition was terminal. It is unclear as to when Bowie himself had found out that the cancer had returned. And it does leave me wondering how that news and the timeline of it influenced the artistic direction behind the Blackstar music video and especially the Lazarus music video. If Lazarus was filmed in November, how much time did Bowie and director Johan Renck, who also did the Lazarus video, how much time did they have to adjust course with the plan? Renck had said that both videos were incredibly collaborative, with Bowie sending him lots of ideas and references that he wanted to embody, and visuals that he wanted to use to allude to different things. How much did the return of the cancer influence the artistic direction of the two music videos that would proceed and lead to Blackstar? To further get a sense of the style and musical aesthetic of Blackstar, look no further than the re-recorded versions of Sue or In a Season of Crime and 'Tis a Pity She Was a Whore. Remember, the roots of Sue or In a Season of a Crime go back to when Bowie and Visconti saw Maria Schneider's orchestra perform, and likely is what first initiated his desire to create a big band album. This alone leaves me curious as to how far into making the big band Blackstar before shifting gears. Regardless, the original, while not a traditional big band recording, plants a jazz fusion seed. It is easy to see the connection between the original Sue to the tone of Blackstar, a bridge guided by, of all records, To Pimp a Butterfly. The version of Sue or In a Season of Crime heard on Blackstar is leaner, while the core of the song remains intact as the band follows a similar rhythmic motif and pulse. There is only a hit of traditionalism in the sound of the original, so it's easy to see that jump to jazz fusion. The Blackstar version minimizes the instrumental passages and is more precise in its delivery. The symphonic edge and wider range of instrumentation of the original is replaced with a contained band that sounds as though they're stacked atop one each other in a tiny room. Built upon a flawless drum and bass groove from Juliana, again, one of the best drummers of our time, one of the most interesting drummers of our time. The Blackstar Sue is stunning and sleek, as the band exercises a greater level of restraint, all except for Juliana, who is absolutely shredding behind the kit. If the original Sue is a modern noir adaptation of big band, then the Blackstar Sue is a dystopic and contemporary take on modern jazz fusion. Furthermore, with each passing verse, the band's restraint grows lesser until the song culminates with an explosive, seemingly entirely improvised conclusion. On the other hand, the Blackstar cut of 'Tis a Pity She Was a Whore is a significant step up from the unmixed sound of the original. Pulling direct inspiration from the demo, which, again, impossible to ignore the Death Grips influence, Blackstar's 'Tis a Pity She Was a Whore sees the band engage in a touch of avant-garde jazz over bombastic drums, as horns and keys accent a lush soundscape laid down by Bowie's backing vocals. This is perhaps the least contained the band is on Blackstar, and the most out there from a jazz context, as instrumental beat sections interrupt the verses with improvised runs and solos. Similarly, it is also where Bowie's vocals, most of which have been very melodic, almost crooning throughout the album, are at their most unbridled. The remaining 3 tracks on the album, Girl Loves Me, Dollar Days, and I Can't Give Everything Away, serve as further thematic and musical extensions to what has already been established. The former, Girl Loves Me, joins the title track as the most cryptic. As Rennick said, and as I've been learning more and more, Bowie's wealth of knowledge from art, literature, cinema was seemingly endless, and his ability to pull from these elements was remarkable. Case in point, Girl Loves Me pulls heavily from both Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange and George Orwell's 1984, 2 of his favorite books. I actually coincidentally just finished rereading 1984 And I have not read A Clockwork Orange, but I have added it to my list. If you are curious about the books that Bowie read, he has, in fact, published his top 100 books. And for a while after his passing, his son was leading a informal book club, one book a month. And there is, in fact, a podcast titled The Bowie Book Club, where they do discuss and read different books from the list. It's a really dense 100 books. There's a lot on here. It's very wide ranging. You're guaranteed to learn something. The song itself is sung in 3 languages: English, Nadsat, a language spoken in A Clockwork Orange, and Polari, a slang language from the gay clubs of 1970s London. Thematically, Girl Loves Me is a reflection on the passing of time, especially when under the influence, but also takes a verse to warn about a particular prostitute. It's all very convoluted. What we can pull from this are the literary connections. A Clockwork Orange, both the book and film, are an exploration of morality, where those with free will engage in environments of hyperviolence, while those under government control are subdued into a controlled and quote-unquote good state. Questioning if forced goodness is actually moral, while also examining how people and governments manipulate each other. Again, I have not read the book or watched the movie. I plan to do so shortly, but this is a book that has had thousands upon thousands upon thousands of essays written about it, and there is a great level of meaning and significance to the themes of A Clockwork Orange. I do not know exactly how it plays out to Girl Loves Me. However, Bowie does mention the Chestnut Tree, which I feel is a connection to the Chestnut Tree Cafe from 1984, a place where reformed thought criminals bide their time awaiting their inevitable purge from society, following their confession and betrayal of their loved ones. Aside from the chorus and the "where the fuck did Monday go" refrain, there are 2 lines in plain English. Both can be found in the first refrain in between the first verse and chorus. The second line reads, "I'm sitting in the chestnut tree," which may refer to Bowie biding his time, left to reflect, knowing that the end is approaching. The line, however, that comes before goes, "I'm cold to this pig and pug show," which may suggest his distaste for fame, celebrity, and acclaim, comparing it to sort of like a fair, best in show, best in class, dog show, barnyard animal type showcase. He doesn't care, or he no longer cares if his work is celebrated, or that he knows that perhaps he likely will not live to see what the response to Blackstar would be. He has grown cold to the critics and the fans alike as he awaits the final moments in the chestnut tree, perhaps reaffirming the theme of the Blackstar video and highlighting that what the critics think does not stop the cycle of rediscovery throughout time and generations, nor does it change the fact that art will outlive the artist no matter what people think of it. Dollar Days follows and stands as a much more literal reflection on death. Lines like, "I'll never see the English evergreens I'm running to, it's nothing to me," may suggest visions of the afterlife or a longing to be home, whereas the chorus opens up with the line, "I'm dying to push their backs against the grain and fool them all again and again," which may have been the key motivation behind Blackstar, one final moment to push the envelope creatively, something Bowie had done time and time again and made a career out of. Of course, prior to his passing, this line felt like a triumphant urge from an aging legend, one who had been relatively silent for the better part of a decade. The desire to show them that he still has it. And while that desire was likely still there as well, post-death, the reoccurring line, "I'm dying to," is a declaration of his state during writing. "I'm dying to" is both the desire along with the prognosis. Dollar Days is a song coated in longing, regret, desire, and acceptance. Knowing the end is near with what's left of his time, he crafts one final masterpiece while further expelling his distaste for the media, the industry, and even the expectations of his audience, something that has likely weighed on him since the very beginning of his career, but probably further developed in those years of retirement, with the constant speculation and, in some cases, even demands for a return. And finally, the album comes to a close with the reflective, "I can't give everything away," a final goodbye to the listeners. One of the lyrics reads, "I know something's very wrong. The pulse returns, the prodigal son." This opens the song, the prodigal son, of course, being the biblical story of the son who left home to live a sinful life before returning home, where he is met with acceptance. In this sense, it could be a spiritual return to the afterlife. Although Bowie has never struck me as all that religious, and I believe there was an old interview, I want to say from the 90s, but it might have been the 2000s, where he was asked what he worships, and he stated very plainly, "I worship life." But of course, things can always change, and to worship life, what does that mean? It's so broad, right? That being said, I've never gotten a sense of spirituality or religion from Bowie. Perhaps his portrayal as an extraterrestrial being, Ziggy Stardust, the Starman, the man who fell to Earth, through the lens of a familiar Christian parable, he is stating his return to where he came from before emerging on Earth, whatever that may look like. The chorus is a single line repeated, "I can't give everything away." This has been up to a great deal of interpretation. Is it a reference to his sickness? Is it a reference to his reclusive nature and desire for a quiet personal life, especially since 2004? Is it that he can't give everything away because he does not belong to his fans? A final declaration that concludes what had previously been prophesized in 1973 with Ziggy Stardust. Beyond the depth of Blackstar, beyond the music, I must say I also absolutely love the production on this record. The live feel of the band, the minimal but critical use of overdubbed instrumentation, and the way Bowie's vocals decay and are present amongst the organized chaos of the band. It's almost as though you're in the same room. The mix is superb. The production perfectly accents the musical direction of the album. In every regard, Blackstar is a record running on all cylinders, a snapshot of an artist at a latter career peak. Symbolically, there's much on this record that felt cryptic upon first hearing it, with the true meaning revealed just days later in the wake of Bowie's passing. While I've discussed many of these along with the interpretations of Blackstar through the lenses of fame and the value of art, the one symbol that we must dig into is the black star itself. Scientifically, a black star arises in theories that combine quantum mechanics and gravity, suggesting quantum pressure halts collapse before a black hole's event horizon forms. Some theories propose these dark stars could be the first stars in the universe, powered by dark matter annihilation, and might be found by the James Webb Space Telescope. a theoretical cold, dead white dwarf, sometimes confused with black stars, for example. And in some ancient traditions, Saturn was referred to as a black star. I don't know much about astronomy, and I certainly know much less about astrophysics or straight up physics for that matter. But what is clear is that a black star is a dying star. Bowie used this as both the title and the artwork, symbolizing his death, with his name adorned through the broken stars underneath the main prominently featured star on the cover. I had only actually recently learned that the star fragments are designed to spell Bowie, which is a very cool nod, right? The anonymity of the artwork, the no name on the cover, again, kind of speaks to some of the themes that are present on this record throughout his career. Speaks to the power of the record, speaks to the power of the music, and almost is asking you, knowing that the end is near, not to let the music get overshadowed by his death, right? The lack of a name is very poignant in highlighting the musicality, the artistry, the integrity, the vision. This isn't a Bowie record. It's unlike anything that he has done, but it's art, right? And with his passing, this is art that he will not get to celebrate. He will not tour this art. He will not have the time to hear much of the speculation or the discussion, the discourse surrounding it. He will not hear the reviews, the good and the bad with this record. So therefore, the name matters less and less to him, significantly less so than the art itself, which is an interesting concept, and again, kind of emphasizes some of the themes that I suggested with the Blackstar music video and the lyrics from Girl Loves Me. Curiously, furthermore, building off of this, building off the idea of the Black Star as a symbol of death, Elvis wrote a song of the same name in 1960, singing, "When a man sees his black star, he knows his time has come." A black star is also a type of cancer lesion, and throughout the record, along with the title itself, Bowie makes frequent references to Aleister Crowley and the occult. Through this, Bowie embodied his swan song, his final body of work, symbolically with all of these ideas. And again, even in the most simple of artwork, leaves so much room for the interpretation of you, the listener, leaving no hint as to which route or which degrees of each route he had intended. This takes us to what remains. Curiously, for all that Blackstar is, Bowie did not intend for it to be his final album. Towards the end of 2015, he had begun writing new songs and recording home demos. On December 7th of that year, the opening night of the Lazarus musical, Bowie informed the show's director, Ivo van Hove, that he wanted to start writing a second musical. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Visconti had said that Bowie called him a week before his death, stating he wanted to make another album. He had known his illness was terminal since November 2015, but believed he had more time left. McCaslin said that before, Bowie wanted to perform some of Blackstar's songs live with the band and wanted to continue recording new music with them as well. While unfortunately this never occurred, on January 8th, 2017, on the one-year anniversary of Blackstar, No Plan, a 4-song EP was released consisting of Lazarus and 3 new songs, No Plan, Killing a Little Time, and When I Met You, each recorded with the core band behind Blackstar. The new tracks were from the same sessions as Blackstar, eliminating the hope that there were any final sessions that surmounted to an incomplete album. It's a great EP. with much of the lyrical and thematic content of the album continued here. Musically, as much as I love No Plan, I understand why the tracks did not make the cut, and it's purely a decision based on taste and aesthetic. While there's a definite jazz fusion sound to No Plan, the EP finds more inspiration in other styles, subverting the fusion vibe of Blackstar. The 3 songs are great, and I feel like where this came out a year afterwards, it was perhaps overshadowed by the distance of his passing, and as well as kind of coming on that anniversary of the 1 year. I feel like the No Plan EP is a really cool record that maybe a lot of people did not actually hear, or they heard upon its release and kind of forgot about. There is a definite jazz fusion sound, but it kind of leans in other directions. The 3 songs are great, especially the winding, riff-heavy, polyrhythmic acid rock of Killing a Little Time. That riff is so good, and the way that Juliana is like implying that the song is in 3/4, despite it being in 4, and the way that that sort of provides some rhythmic counterpoint to the phrasing from Bowie and the rest of the band. And at times it feels like they're all locking in on 3. And sometimes it feels like they're pushing away from that as the drums are pounding away in 3 and they're playing in 4. It's a super cool beat. Like, what he's doing is fantastic, but like the way it sits with the rest of the song is so cool because it gives the impression that it's 2 bars of 3 and then a bar of 2, but then at other times really it's 2 bars of 4. It's just such a cool song. I love Killing a Little Time. But for the sake of delivering a cohesive album to the standard of Blackstar, a fully fleshed out artistic vision, Blackstar is actually probably better off without them. I understand why these songs were cut. It's a great EP. It should not. The fact that they were leftovers from this session probably leaves you with the impression that they're not as special. And I would argue that they're very strong songs, but the way that they lean away from that really lean jazz fusion, punchy sort of sound, I think it would kind of muddy the final delivery, the precision of Blackstar. Still, there is something to be said about seeing a wider scope to these sessions, and the quality of No Plan leaves me curious as to how many more songs, complete or incomplete, how many alternative cuts remain unreleased from this era, as well as the supposed home demos that Bowie was recording when he was discussing the possibility of a follow-up album with Visconti. And of course, given the live feel for the record and the improvisation, I am very curious as to what other takes and versions of each song exist. How many jams are there of that band alone and that band with Bowie, and how many songs or shapes of the same songs are there? On January 8th, 2016, David Jones concluded the story of his greatest and most enigmatic character yet, David Bowie. Unlike Ziggy Stardust, David Bowie was brought to an end with grace. Rather than be consumed by his audience and the industry alike, Jones ushered in the end on his own terms, defiantly going where he had yet to tread, knowing full well that many would not be able to follow. By refusing to pander, the previously established cycle was broken, the narrative rewritten brilliantly, a twist on all expectations performed in plain sight. As for David Jones, his body would follow shortly thereafter on January 10th, 2016. Blackstar remains a complicated record to digest. Musically, it is highly experimental, not just within the context of Bowie's own discography, but also in terms of modern contemporary jazz fusion. Thematically, there is an intensity as Bowie examines one of the few universal truths, unlike perhaps anyone before him, documenting his own reflections and grieving while undergoing treatment for what appeared to be a losing battle. And while I do believe that his decision to double down on jazz fusion was a conscious effort to create something artistically challenging in spite of both his audience and his own legacy rooted in classic rock, there is an undeniable part of Blackstar that served as a farewell to the world, friends, family, and fans alike. Almost like a thank you note for a life well lived. On top of this, in a sort of meta fashion, we can use Blackstar as an examination of character study. Bowie used his final outing as a chance to explore his legacy and conclude and separate the mythology of Bowie from Jones. Playing with these narratives that he has spent his career dancing around and celebrating, and bringing it all full circle in one grand conclusion. Blackstar is many things. It is defiant, it is creative, it is challenging. Of all these things, it is brilliant. In the face of death, Bowie found rebirth through lifelong passion and a desire for one final reinvention. Most importantly, Blackstar demonstrated, for a final moment, the artistry, the musicality, and the integrity to vision that made Bowie a once-in-a-lifetime artist. Someone who had remained within a class of his own, proving that even in death, there is life. And with that, the man who fell to earth has returned to the cosmics. Thank you for tuning in to episode 56. Next week, on January 26, I am joined by my good friend Dad Bod the Storyteller as we explore the meaning, lyricism, and thematic storytelling of Kendrick Lamar's genre and cultural defining album, Good Kid, Mad City. I'm Jared Harris, and this is Beats by Jer.